Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to the IUCN Global Youth Summit. We're here with an intergenerational dialogue to have an open and honest conversation about youth engagement in policymaking. And before I go any further, a few logistical notes. To take part in this conversation in a different language, please check the bottom right corner of your screen, find the image of the globe, and select the language that you would like. You can also click the closed captioning button for a live transcript, and instructions on that in multiple languages are in the Zoom chat. And since we are talking about youth engagement today, we want to engage with you. So please do drop your questions, comments, and ideas in the Zoom chat. You can also post into Whova, but those questions will be answered after the session ends. So for anything that you'd like to ask the panelists or with any technical difficulties, please use the Zoom chat to make sure that we can get back to you. And with that, we'll get started. It's really exciting to be part of the IUCN's first Global Youth Summit. We have over 13,000 people from all around the world taking part, and we're getting to know each other on community boards. We're learning from each other in workshops. We're spending time together during body awareness and networking sessions. And for the next 2 hours, we're going to be joined by some really fantastic guests for our second intergenerational dialogue. I'm Becca Farnham. I serve on the board of directors for the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, and I teach at Syracuse University, London. As a professor, my research and classes focus on environmental justice. And one of the big themes in environmental justice is that participation really matters. It's not just about the outcome, it's about how we get there. And there are a lot of underrepresented communities in our world. The ideas, needs, and perspectives of women, people with disabilities, refugees, the LGBT community, Indigenous peoples, communities of color, and far too many more have been and continue to be marginalized by the way we do governance and create institutions. And we're starting to get a little bit better, but still way too often, the representation and inclusion of these historically marginalized groups is very superficial. And of course, that includes how organizations and governments interact with youth. Youth voices, youth energy, and youth knowledge have led social change movements, political demonstrations, and economic campaigns that have changed history time and time again. Yet young people continue to be excluded from many spaces of power. And so today, we're going to spend some time thinking about what honest, equitable, and real youth engagement in governance and decision-making looks like. Because giving youth a seat at the table isn't enough, youth should be involved in deciding what the table looks like in the first place. And the incredible panelists join me today are people who are working to make that happen. As I introduce the panelists, I'm going to share with you someone who inspires them. And I would love for you to join that conversation. So drop a note in the Zoom chat about who inspires you to do the work that you're doing as well. Kalea Frederick is a climate justice activist who serves on the Petaluma County Commission, and she is inspired by her son, Nikesh Lofton. Nika Khan coordinates the ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program. Her work on urban biodiversity is inspired by the youth that she encounters and learns from every day who are making transformative change in their communities. Lefteris Aropakis is inspired by his grandfather, who sought education from an extremely poor and rural community and made it possible for Lefteris to do the work that he does now as co-founder of a marine sustainability initiative working with multi-generational fishing communities in the Mediterranean. Paloma Costa from Brazil serves on the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on climate change and has brought her legal advocacy to several UNFCCC COP meetings and other major international events. Paloma is inspired not by one person, but by the many, the diversity of people who are fighting and resisting climate injustice around the world. Seung-Ah Lee is Deputy Director General at the IUCN. Seung-Ah brings more than 2 decades of expertise in public-private partnerships and organizational strategy to this intergenerational dialogue, and she is inspired by Clayton Christensen, the author of How Will You Measure Your Life? Joyce Monswea is the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. She is trained as a microbiologist and began her career in public health and remains inspired by the many public health workers around the world. And Jyoti Matar Philip comes to us from the Convention on Biological Diversity, where she is leading work on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. She comes from an amazing heritage of biodiversity protection. Her grandmother successfully put an end to tiger hunting in her state in the 1920s. And as for me, I'm inspired by these 7 people. So that is plenty from me. And over to our panelists. I'd like us to start by first simply defining the problem, reflecting on what youth washing and tokenism are. I'm going to ask Mika if she's willing to start by sharing some of her experiences, either witnessing or being subjected to tokenism. And as the panelists reflect, please share with us in the chat, when have you experienced tokenism in environmental decision-making? Mika, over to you.
Thank you, Becca. Hello, everybody. Well, this story is a couple years old. This was pre-COVID then, and it was an in-person international congress with environment ministers in the high-level segment. And it has an attached youth forum. So it's quite typical of something that could happen now too online. And the outputs of the youth forum was a youth declaration and this moment where young people physically handed letters to their country's environment ministers at the high-level closing. And there was a lot of photo taking. So this felt like there was direct voice from young people to the decision makers. But the devil is in the details. For the first part, we were told that the youth declaration and the letters to the ministers were to be our outputs. We weren't given a choice in how we thought was the best way to bring our voices to these high-level individuals. And it could have been the declaration and the letters, but it could have been a dialogue like this. It could have been a bilateral coffee or dinner to get to know each other better, you know? So we weren't given that option. That was the first point. And then the second point was that there was also, unfortunately, insufficient training for the young people to understand how to engage as well with decision makers. For one, many of the youth attending, it was their first time knowing what a declaration was and how it's being used in this kind of a context. And then for the letters to the ministers, we were given a 1-hour training throughout the whole forum to write a letter. And we were expected to have it represent what the youth of our country would like for the environment. And this was dangerous because it could have even perpetuated that young people don't know what we're talking about, just because we didn't have enough time to prepare for something as important as this. And so all these little details actually led to what I felt was kind of youth washing in that event, unfortunately, but I hope that these 2 main points can bring us forward, that young people need to be sufficiently trained for interacting with decision makers so that it doesn't backfire, and then also that we need to have a say in how we're being engaged.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mika, both for that very real grounded story and a response, right, and some advice from it. Sunga, could we hear from you on this same question?
Definitely. Thanks, Becca. And if you allow me, I want to share 2 different sides of a Craig experience from the different side of the coin. So maybe the first experience I want to share was earlier in my career, I was lucky enough to be a co-founder of a global network on financial inclusion. And because of that kind of position, I was lucky to be invited in a number of high-level discussions. Maybe not only because of that, but I did tick the box of diversity. So I was young, I'm a woman, and I'm from Asia. So, and that's a difficult combination to find for, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I don't know whether that's a blessing or a curse. So I think that was the also a reason I got invited to many of these meetings, including the G20, APEC, ASEAN, World Economic Forum. So, and what I found really difficult at that time was not getting a seat, but having the same weight to my voice and to make that what I represent really counts. And it came in a sometimes subtle way, not even intentional. But I think it was just the way that we were working in those high-level discussions that it just happened. So I can give you an example. For example, there are many panelists, many speakers, and I get to speak last. And then you always get this like 1 or 2 minutes, like, okay, we are kind of running out of time. So you have to summarize your point in 1 minute. Or, you know, you get an opportunity to say a statement, but then you're not in the part of the discussion. So your opportunity is making a statement, but then you don't have the opportunity to proactively discuss and participate in the decision, because that's the way the meeting is formed. Or, you know, you make a great a statement with the consultation with the group that you're representing. Later you see a minutes and it's not there, you know, this kind of examples. And I think I really had to work hard to assert myself in a way, which was, I think, though not that I was used to. And the learning there was, it's not about just having a seat on the table, but having an equal weight and voice and the equal opportunity to kind of go throughout the decision process. So that's a quick example on that side. The second example I want to make is more now moving fast forward more recently. I had many opportunity to then recruit people. So not only for my team or for my organization, but it could be a board member, it could be an advisory group, a panel. And the way we usually do many organizations, including the different organization I was in, and there are criteria, their skill set, and you assess that, based on that, you assess the candidates. And I just found it kind of difficult if we sometimes use the traditional model of that. It's a number of experience, it's number of successful achievement that you have to showcase. And it's difficult if we strictly put that lens to find the right young people. And I think what is needed here and what I was challenged was really think in a different way to identify the skill set that we need to make the project or the program successful, and different way of assessing those skill sets. And if we try to make that work, identifying the skill set, the diversity of perspective that we want, and way to measure that better, I think it will be easier to bring the right young people on the table and not become a checkbox of, okay, we have to find someone, so we found this person. So I think that's the two quick experience I had. Thank you.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today. Well, at least from my experience, when I said previously that I am inspired by these young people, I meant it really seriously, because we are waking up every day to like form each other, to build workshops, to talk with decision makers, to write demands, to participate in meetings at local, regional, international levels. And with all of that, we still have to work, we still have to have a life, we still have to study. But when it comes to really participate and effective participate, it really makes me wonder, because I am always invited, and there are sometimes that I am also invited to speak, and people also go and make a veto on what am I going to speak. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what is the thematic of the invitation. And most of the time, the thematic is the same. Youth, climate, activism, let's talk about it. I mean, I too went to the streets to fight and scream for climate justice and say that the world is on fire. But honestly, with all the work that I do every day, besides my formal work and my studies and everything, I have an experience of 5 years practicing law, fighting for indigenous and environmental rights. So, I mean, when I am invited to these spaces, I don't want to be just there to say, yay, decision leaders, you need to act, you need to do something, the world is on fire. I mean, I have concrete points, and I discussed these with young people in several parts of the world and in my location, and we have demands, we have proposals, we are doing the things that are not being done. For example, every day I teach like young people in different parts in the slums, in the communities about climate change, because there is no such thing like this in the national basin. So what I'm talking here about is when you try to invite us, don't see us just as youth. We are youth, we have specialities, we have a lot to say, and most of all, we have proposals, and we want these proposals to start be working. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I'm very happy to go after Paloma because I want to take a different tack on this. I want to, we at CBD and me, my job at CBD is to ensure that tokenism and youth washing doesn't actually happen in our intergovernmental process. And therefore, I hope that when people and youth come to our process, they don't feel that way because we have systems in place. We don't want tokenism in any way. We don't want to use people and majority groups such as women, elderly people, vulnerable groups, or minorities, indigenous people. We want them to have a voice in the process. And especially now when we are developing the biodiversity, the new global biodiversity framework, which is to help all of us live, to reach our vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. So we are very, very careful about this. We know we don't want to have one person. We're careful that we don't have one person that we say represents the voice of youth. We, like every group, youth have their own identities, diverse views, opinions, backgrounds, interests, and personalities. So we want to make sure that everything comes together. And in our process, we have the GIBBN, which is the Global Biodiversity Youth Network, and I'm sure, and I know that they're participating here, and they will be speaking also. And so I don't want to speak on their behalf, but with them, we ensure that they have space, that they can self-organize, that they can speak with all the youth. They have a network around the world, that they get their views together. And as you know, in an intergovernmental process, it's normally parties and member states that speak, but we try and ensure that we have some space for other stakeholders through what we call the major stakeholder group. And our major stakeholders are youth, women, indigenous people, subnational governments, and others. And so the groups behind these categories are responsible for coordinating the multiple and diverse views of their constituencies, and then they come and reflect. They reflect upon these at our formal sessions. At all our sessions, youth are given a chance to speak. And I see Mika is there, so I hope that she will support me in this. So this is a way we feel is a way of eliminating tokenism by making space for youth to intervene in adult fora. So it's not just children and, but to have an equal voice where we are all speaking together. We also give them space to coordinate themselves so they can consider their diversity of views, including from youth who don't get a chance to speak. And that's very important because it is GIBBN who brings those voices into our fora. And finally, in addition to involving youth in meetings, we have other efforts. We make other efforts to integrate youth into other areas of our work through projects and programs, and I can speak about that later. But for now, I think it is what our role is to ensure and safeguard the voices of youth in our process. Thanks.
Thanks, Jyoti. And I think, I mean, Sungha, some really great reflections on how kind of different groups of tokenizing can add up, right, in very problematic personal ways and intersectional ways. And Paloma, really great points on, like, we're not here to be your cute youth, right? We're not a photo op, also, as Mika was pointing out, right? There's a lot more to it. So thank you to Mika, Sungha, and Paloma for sharing and being willing to be vulnerable in sharing those. Experiencing tokenism is never fun, nor is reliving it. But I think that naming and understanding it is really important to build recognition and create the kind of accountability that Jyoti and the CBD are trying to do. So as we think about that recognition, it would be great to hear some of our other panelists reflect on how they've learned to identify kind of in the moment when situations of tokenism are happening. So Lefteris, would you maybe kick us off with some of your experiences navigating relationships among and between different generations?
Yeah, and thank you very much, Becca, for everything and for the event. I'm really excited that I'm here to discuss with you about these very serious topics. As most of the panelists here, I have experienced tokenism as a young person many times already in my life, and it's something that is really unpleasant. So for me, the best way to navigate yourself out of the situation is, first of all, to be able to understand that you are experiencing tokenism. Many times it's not really clear. So you need first to understand and identify what you're experiencing right now. And then I think you have two choices. The one choice is to actually use the position that you will have. You know, maybe you are a speaker like in having 1 or 2 minutes last days of an event, but try to leverage your point to make yourself heard, to show yourself and to show your work. So this would be my first choice. This is what I'm trying to do, but many times it's not the case. So in these times that you cannot use your position to actually change things, then you always have the freedom of your choice. You can decide not to participate in the situation, in this event, in the scenario, in the scheme. You can always walk out. So what I would like to say is that in order to navigate ourselves out of the situation, we need to lead by our own examples. And not only when we are experiencing tokenism, but later on, we need to make sure that we are not creating these kind of situations ourselves. So this is what I would like to share. And yeah, thank you very much for the discussion.
Thanks so much, Lefteris. Absolutely. And I think a really good point that sometimes we can say as much with our absence as with our presence, right? And how to make sure that we are being present or not present in meaningful ways and not allowing our image or our voices to be, kind of tokenized in those ways. Thank you. Joyce, I am sure as a woman in STEM and now a woman in policymaking, this has come up in many ways at different parts of your life. So we would love to hear a few from you.
Thank you, Becca. And I'm so glad that I'm coming to speak after Lefteris, who is one of our UNEP's young champions. So, shoes are big, but I'll try my best. Now, absolutely, Becca, you're so on point. I mean, I have experienced tokenism. I was listening to what Sungha Lee was talking about being an Asian. So for me, also add my own race, that, as somebody said, it's a triple whammy. And unfortunately for me, I look younger than my age. So usually when I show up in meetings, people immediately have judged me even before I walk through the door. Now, what are the ways to navigate? I think one is we as leaders, as parents, for some of us who are parents, to really practice what we preach. I have 2 young adults, and I cannot tell them to go and do one thing and in the office I do something. So the value system is extremely important. And I saw it with my parents, how they provided the platform and the space for me to be a youth and come up with ideas, good or bad. So that is one. I think 2 is leveraging the networks. And I'm so glad Lefteris is here, because what we see in UNEP, for example, our Young Champions of the Earth, which is the highest award we give to young people, we're now forming networks of young people who are doing some really neat things, and they support each other. And that reminds me of my own experience when I was growing up, and I was a member of the Girl Guides because I wanted to be something bigger as a purpose, and the Girl Guides provided me the network to be a champion, even then in the 70s when I didn't know it was a champion. So one is finding the networks that can support you. And this type of summit, youth summit, are extremely, extremely important. At the organizational level, because I'm one of the leaders in UNEP, as Jyoti has mentioned, we have policies that absolutely do not support tokenism or any type of exclusion. For example, currently I'm leading UNEP's work on racism. And if you look at our task force on racism, we actually have young people from junior professionals, volunteers, and interns as part of the voice. I also tell young people, I used to be one, if there is no chair, bring your folded chair and unfold it at the table and bring that voice, because then you hold us as leaders, as adults, accountable. So those are just some of the ways to navigate, but also I will say something that I tell a lot of young people: you have to do you. You guys have so many innovations, experiences, the Generation Z, how you use technology. So you have to be true to yourself. And that also gives you a bit of grounding when you're navigating tokenism. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joyce. Before I shift over to Kailea, I'm going to remind all of us, mostly myself, to speak slowly to help with our translations and accessibility, which is, of course, another aspect of tokenism that happens far too frequently. So thank you to the team translator, and I will try to contain my American enthusiasm. Kailea, we'd love to hear from you.
I was just over here taking so many notes as everyone was sharing. Lefteris wanted to just say that I wanted to emphasize the point you brought around the opportunity to decline an invitation. I think one of the things that's important to remember is that, especially when there's an invitation that has been put forward for your voice to be present, that it is really an invitation. It doesn't mean that you have to give a yes. There's that initial opportunity to do your own research, to discern, to ask really straightforward questions around why your participation is being asked of you and how it is that your participation will actually be a part of, engaging and hopefully shifting, something that you're a part of. I have found that, myself, I'm someone that spent my 20s in the youth climate justice movement, and I'm at the very end of my 20s, just in the last months over here. So I find myself kind of transitioning from youth spaces and kind of casting my reflection back. One of the things that I think about is how in my earlier 20s, I felt afraid to actually advocate for myself and to actually speak out in spaces when I felt like I was being overlooked, or when I felt like I wasn't being respected in some way, that somehow I would lose out on the opportunity, and that I had to kind of just go along with what little was maybe being provided to me in an experience or instance. So I think here what I'm wanting to say is that it's important to own your space, and it's important to remember that you as a human being matter, and that you get to choose if you want to be a part of something or not. And that if you are a part of something, you have that opportunity to leave as well and to vocalize that. Something I also wanted to speak to is the power of mentorship. And this was something, that Joyce, I believe you were kind of touching on when thinking about how young people can really advocate for each other in groups, but also how important it is, I think, to find someone who is a bit older than you, who you respect and who you look up to, and to vocalize that and to ask for help. Because, as some of the things that Mika had brought up just around not being given the right amount of time to actually prepare or understand a process, it's so important to remember that you can ask questions and that you can actually say in real time, this is the first time that I'm engaging in this process. And I'm so grateful for the grace that is being allowed me in this moment to walk through this with you. I have found that actually in real time speaking to actually what I'm going through supports a group in supporting me in actually being able to show up in the best way possible. And then the last point I wanted to touch on is, really like know your points, come with your proposals. This is something that I wish in my earliest days of activism and advocacy, I was most supported in. I think it's just so critical to actually show up at the table ready to engage. And if you don't know the process, that's okay. You can ask for help, but show up with clarity around why it is that you're there and what it is that you're trying to do. So those are some of my points around how to navigate when you are being tokenized, which again, as a woman of color, as someone who has been in the youth climate justice movement, we definitely have experienced this quite a few times. So I'll turn it back over to you, Becca.
Thanks so much, Kailea. Absolutely. And I think a really beautiful message around the importance of compassion in youth understanding where the adults are coming from and maybe what perspective they're bringing, and making sure that we're able to help them see our perspective and position as well. It's clear from these experiences that tokenism is an ongoing problem in a lot of space. It takes place all around the world in various ways. Many of us experience it not just as youth, but also as other parts of our identity. We've all experienced it in one form or another. But now that we've explicitly acknowledged that we have a problem, we've also made it pretty clear that among this panel, we definitely have a good amount of expertise dealing with it and responding to it. So I'd like to spend a little bit more time thinking about how we can proactively address it as well as individuals and collectively. What do we need to do to move away from token representation to equitable engagement and participation in governance? We want everyone's ideas here again as well. So for those of you listening, please type in the chat one word that you think captures the most essential must-have ingredient to make genuine participation happen for environmental governance. Make sure that it's just one word, because we're going to build a word cloud from your responses. And for our panelists, Kailea, you have successfully campaigned for a very specific and tangible thing in Petaluma, where there are now 2 young people seats on the county board. So as the attendees post in the chat, and I'm sorry, there's also a link posted in the Zoom chat. So if you want to add your words to that Mentimeter, everyone, while Kailea shares a little bit about how she won those 2 young people's seats and maybe kind of the very specific ingredient that helped to make it happen.
Yeah, this meeting is actually, or this panel is happening in perfect time, because I actually just last night had my second meeting with the Climate Action Commission with our 2 youth members. And I received some in real-time feedback from one of my other commissioners about how grateful he was that he had listened to me and supported my advocacy around bringing 2 youth members on. And I did just want to clarify that I don't sit on a county commission. I actually sit on the Petaluma Climate Action Commission, which is a city council policy advisory body of people. So anything that relates to climate change, which is essentially everything, we get to weigh in on and impact or shift policy locally in the town that we live in. So, I think this is actually a perfect example as well of a time, where I myself was stepping into a very new role. I had never before been a commissioner and had never before sat in such formal governmental processes. And I had to ask for a lot of help in real time on the dais around how to do that, especially in this moment where I was actually proposing to bring in youth. And I had very clearly named that in order for our commission to be truly representative of our community, we actually needed to have the voices of young people present with us. Otherwise, we wouldn't actually be able to do the work that we needed to on the level that we needed to, because we would be missing some core voices. And I think because I came from the climate youth movement, I was in some ways surprised at the level of pushback I actually received when I brought this forward. My son just got up, so you're going to hear him behind me for a moment. Yeah, there was quite a few people. Oh, hold on one moment.
And hello to another youth voice.
Hello there. Join us.
Yeah, he's not quite 3, so we will pause on that one at this moment in time. He really just wants to sit on my lap. I was surprised at the amount of pushback that I received. There were quite a few members on my body that had all sorts of, pretty strong thoughts around the idea that, they were young people. What exactly was it that they could bring to the space? There were even, things that were petty. There's not enough physical space here on the dais, for there to be another seat to be placed here, or even 2 seats. Or if we only bring one person, then it will split our body because we're a voting body, yada, yada, yada. It just kind of went on and on. And I just remember thinking that this is something that I know is right. This is actually a conversation on morals and ethics when we talk about true diversity and inclusion as a community. And I also remember that there were audience members sitting that were nodding their heads yes at me, that sent me a very clear support of signal to continue bringing this. And this was a point that I had to argue for several meetings publicly on the spot. And then I had to go and get my votes, which means I had to spend the time outside of the meetings convincing the other commissioners on why youth voices matter and how it is that, especially when we're talking about climate change, youth are leading the way. So how is it that we could be overlooking them? And in the end, I was able to convince and get the votes that I needed. And we were able to have our city council change our amendment and bring on the members. Another thing that I was very clear about was that I didn't want there to be youth that were just sitting there taking notes or that we just listened to. I wanted them to be equal voting members of our body. So their voices needed to be equal to ours and hold as much weight. And I'm so pleasantly, no, not even surprised, but, I think again, because I still in some ways think of myself as a young person, knew that we were going to bring in some incredible people. We brought in an 8th grader and someone that is, I think, in 9th or 10th grade. And they bring so much to our conversation, so much, including the fact that they're just not afraid professionally. So they actually speak very, very honestly about what it is that they want to see. And it continues to place us adults in an accountable space, which is really where we belong. We need to be held accountable. So that's a little bit of my experience. I continue to think that youth are just the best. And when we actually center their voices, we go forward quicker. So I'll turn it back over to you, Becca.
Thanks, Kailea. So is it fair to say that your one word is accountability then, or would you choose another one?
This is definitely my word as a person. Yes.
Great. Thanks, Kailea. And Lefteris, you have some experience with this from a more kind of community development context than formalized politics. So would love to briefly hear what you would name as a kind of key strategy or tool in the work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Becca. So yeah, what we actually do in the Mediterranean is we mainly work with communities. We started a few years ago when Greece had the peak of the economic crisis. And the reason I wanted to do something was the extreme rise that we had in youth unemployment. It was over 59% at the point. So I was discussing one day with my father. My family, they have been fishermen for 5 generations. And he was complaining that, the fishers, they couldn't find enough personnel for the boats. So I thought, why not create a school to train the unemployed young people and make them fishermen? So this is what we did. The project was successful. The point is also that I didn't know anything about fishing. I studied management and economics. So I had to go on a fishing boat, on a fishing trip to see the whole procedure. And there, I was shocked to see that fishermen were collecting from the sea, not only fish, but also plastic, like lots of it. I don't know if any of you seen the conspiracy recently, but this is what I experienced in the Aegean Sea. And then, the fishermen, they were just throwing the plastic back in the sea. And they told me, Lefteris, this is plastic is not our problem. So I realized that it is, that by 2050, we will have more plastic than fish in the sea. The fishermen were not aware of that. So this is why we decided to act. And we act locally. I started with a few fishermen and I told them, guys, just bring the plastic that you catch with your nets back in the land. In the beginning, nobody thought that they would bring it. But the pilot was really successful. And then over the past 2 years, we are working with 21 local fishing communities in the Mediterranean, total of 1,000 fishermen. And we have created one of the biggest marine plastic cleanups in the Mediterranean Sea, where not only we collect plastic from the sea, but also we recycle and upcycle this plastic into new products. So my advice would be, if you want to work with local community building, have a bottom-up approach. Go to the local communities, listen to them, ask them what goes well, what goes wrong, what can be improved, and then do your intervention. Start locally, and if you are passionate about what you do, I think you can have ripple effects of real long-term impact.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lefteris. I think maybe listening is the key word there, right? So quickly we move in to do education and capacity building or creating space in ways that we think space need to be made, instead of really starting by making sure we're understanding, what the community we're working with, whatever community that is, right, is able to kind of share with us what their needs and experiences and priorities are. Thanks so much for that. And Joyce, perhaps over to you. What have you seen that worked well, maybe especially in UNEP's youth environment facility?
Thank you, Becca. So, if there was a headline, we would say is Youth Voice Matter, and specifically focusing on the United Nations Environment Assembly, for example. We just had one in February this year. It was a smaller one. There is actually a dedicated global youth environment assembly. And what that does for an organization like UNEP, which is the highest global environment authority, youth's voices are heard through the youth assembly. I personally think it demonstrates youth multilateralism using UNEA as a platform. I think what has been very good for us, but also in our engagement with the youth, it's actually the UN Major Group for Children and Youth that organizes the assembly. So there is ownership from the youth community themselves, and that enriches the discussion that happens during UNEA. I would also go further and say recently we issued an interactive Geo6 for Youth, which was actually a publication authored by 28 youth from across the globe, supplementing and complementing the Global Environment Outlook, which is one of our major flagship scientific publication that UNEP releases. So the engagement of the youth in helping us to translate very sometimes difficult environmental scientific publications to target youth audience, it's also helping us to being more relevant. This year, it marks the launch of the UN Decade for Ecosystems Restoration. And again, we are working together with FAO and the World Bank. It's a global commitment to prevent, reverse, and restore degraded ecosystems. We will have opportunities for youth to engage, to share their ideas and knowledge so as to make the restoration a success. I would also add on advocacy. If you look at our plastic pollution, for example, the Tide Turners program, which is a UNEP global youth movement, it's driven by youth. So on the advocacy as well, youth are actually involved. Leading up to COP26, we are hosting a number of events I just attended one recently with the UK presidency where youth groups were represented, again, bringing their voices leading up to the COP in Glasgow. So we've learned a lot, and we are very open to learning more in case there are suggestions from the youth on how we can improve and or do better in our provision of platform and convening youth across the globe. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce. And I'm so glad you said platform again at the end, because that was certainly the word that I had in mind for you, right? And platforms, I think, is really what Joyce was sharing as well, right? That there are multiple spaces and kind of moments and ways that you can entry points for youth to come in from different directions. So thanks so much to Joyce for that. And as we're talking now about COP, Paloma, you have been to several of these kind of events. Any of us who have been at one of the climate change COPs know just how massive these gatherings are and how hard it can be to make yourself heard and not just have a very strict and scripted presence, right? Here's where you stand, here's what you say, here's when you say it, kind of thing. So as a youth delegate then at UN climate conferences, how have you overcome some of those barriers to build meaningful partnerships?
Hey, well, I mean, when we think about effective participation, I just delivered my thesis about it, and it is built upon access to information, which is not a reality everywhere, and education, which means that we are capable to understand the information that are provided and can effectively participate in the process. And by education, I also mean like informal education, what it must be called. Because as I was saying, at least in the region where I come from, me and the youth groups here are the one responsible for being teaching about climate issues. And also for me, what I learned with the indigenous people here is the most important thing I ever learned in my life, I can say. But in this sense, and why I think it is super important to highlight this, because when we come to COP spaces, besides the whole process to participate in a COP spaces as having the opportunity to have badges, which is not a reality for youth organizations because we are not into the UNFCCC process. So I cannot count how many times I implore for everyone that I know to please give me a badge for a youth delegate from Brazil. And thank you for all that are watching and ever helped me. Thank you. The badges, for example, I come from Latin America. It's been, 6 COPs that doesn't happen here in my region. And honestly, when you compare euros with real, it's too expensive for us, but we still also implore and manage to bring these young voices there to participate. And all these efforts that we take a year doing this effort, training the delegation, making sure that we have like partners that can finance us, that can give us badges, that can give us opportunity inside there to participate somehow. And also to connect us with the decision makers that to be honest, most of the times are not that open to talk with us. And to do all of that, like when you go to COP, what I personally see is that this movement that the young people is starting to unite and have this strength, have this force, is where we had like a small possibility to make a change. In the last few COPs, for example, for me, it was to see change happening, to see those young people taking up the COP and making it stop. I was one of the young persons that was excluded from COP with 300 other more, 500, I don't know, we were so much. And we were all expelled for COP because we wanted to participate in the negotiations. So that's how we are treated. And we come with informal areas, like with the demands, we participate in the side events, we try talking to decision makers, we we bring, I think we are so creative. I cannot say how many ways we try to put attention on what we have to say. And when we try to stop COP, we are like expelled. So, I mean, if you are a young people there, like find our group because we have much more strength together. And in this process, like if I have some advice to say is just to speak up. And even though if you are, I was seeing that Kalia was talking about that, for example, children have they can say whatever because they are not like losing their jobs. For me, in my case, that sometimes I'm losing my job if I say whatever I want. But do speak up, because if we don't, who will speak up for us? So do it. We are together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paloma. And I think they're collective, right? I mean, it's about collective action and bringing the unity together and many voices, kind of saying the same thing, because, eventually they won't be able to throw out everyone. So thank you so much, Paloma. Jyoti, I'm going to turn to you and ask specifically, while you were sharing a little bit about the CBD's relationship with Gibbon, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, one of the questions that came up is if youth are embraced as full partners, what do you see as some of the key principles for real intergenerational dialogue and collaboration? So what is the kind of magic ingredient for the kind of interaction between a youth movement and a really big multilateral institution?
Thanks so much. And again, following Paloma and her experiences at UNFCCC COP, which I have attended a lot of them, and they're massive. I agree with you. We are a much smaller COP. Our COPs are much smaller. We are very, very lucky to have Gibbon, and we work directly with them. We have now also a lot of delegations that are putting youth on their delegations. So they come as a part of the country delegations and not, separate as Gibbon and all, which is a very, very big change for us. And we think that that is one way of ensuring that people are not, that the youth voices are heard because they can attend delegation meetings. We had, I think, Denmark and Netherlands and Canada, and I think South Africa also had it, but don't quote me on it, I'm not sure, but a lot more are happening. I also think that, we need, through Gibbon, we have these global youth programs for internships, etc. And we are trying to make efforts to reach out to marginalized groups in rural areas or urban marginalized groups who don't necessarily speak English. I think that is very important because we are a very English-centric world, and people like me who speak English have always had better opportunities to participate everywhere. So that is another thing that we're doing. And we are also trying to reach people who don't have access to Ivy League schools. So all of these kind of programs are important and things that we are trying to do. And as you know, under the convention through Gibbon, the youth actively participate in decision making. They have been, I'm leading the post-2020 process. We have always had youth representatives in all our thematic and regional consultations in our post-2020 open-ended working group consultation. So the actual negotiations, the youth have always been there. They have provided very good written submissions to us that can be included in our post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And these are taken as seriously as they are every other submission that we receive. So they have made, interventions on goals and targets and what they want to see the world as. We have had youth as part of a number of CBD task teams. For example, on communication and awareness, it's your future. You have to be part of deciding for your future. We will be old and gone by 2050, so it's your future. You will be me in 2050, so we have to provide you with this support and access. Young people have been nominated by parties, by member states to join technical meetings, for example, on marine and coastal biodiversity. And as I said, a number of young people are nominated by member states to be part of their delegations, which I think is extremely important. Youth also directly engage in the implementation, as I said earlier, of the convention. Over the last 10 years, youth have received support from the CBD Secretariat and donor parties to co-design a series of projects that support implementation. These have led to very, very concrete on-the-ground actions involving young people, their knowledge, and also for improving their communications, using their skills, interests, and knowledge to act for biodiversity, and thus increasing their sense of belonging, we hope. And Mika can attest to that. We hope a sense of responsibility towards biodiversity objectives of the convention, and their sense of belonging, and also, you know, to be part of our future when we start implementing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And as you said, Paloma, Gibbon also organizes side events and activities at the margins of our CBD meetings. And one of the things that I do want to comment on where climate is concerned, as well as biodiversity, that the youth, you know, the youth strikes, the youth campaigns, etc., that happen during COP are very, very valuable, because it is something that people stop and see and engage with and take away. You may not see that there is an instant reaction to what you're saying, because, you know, people come from, you know, with member state positions and all, but there is definitely an internalization of what you're doing. I remember, you know, in the lead up to 2015, there was so much youth activity and campaigns around less than 2 degrees, or actually 1.5, but under 2 degrees is something that happened because of these fabulous campaigns that have been organized around the world by youth. So I think that you should take, you know, take some credit for that, because it is your work that was also something that parties and member states saw and agreed to. So I don't think it's all bad. It's also very good that you are participating and being part of it. Where we also have, you know, examples where we give youth space and support, and where we engage with them in a diverse set of activities and co-design activities, so that we, you know, so that when they connect with adults, they can speak as adults, and you know, so that's also something that you have been saying that we provide them with the training so that they are not marginalized as youth and, you know, whatever, but that they're able to speak at the same level as us. And with such support, young people can empower themselves, we feel, and mobilize themselves. And in the end, that can only benefit biodiversity and the future of life on this earth. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. Yes, so word to add to the word cloud, empowerment, right? Empowerment both that, you know, we do for other communities and that we do for ourselves through all of these kind of mechanisms. Thank you. I'm going to ask our wonderful tech team to go ahead and share our word cloud. So here are some of the words that came from our participants as well as our panelists. And Mika, very much over to you here to kind of respond from Gibbon's side to some of what CVD has been talking about, and also maybe reflect on some of the words you're seeing in this word cloud. Respect is the very big one, but also empathy, communication, listening. Would love to get your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Becca. And thank you very much also to the CBD Secretariat, that it makes our participation meaningful. We're not just there as to make loud noises, we're there and actually bringing value as equal partners in the process. And Jyoti mentioned so many different initiatives. I just want to concretize it and give some real examples of what that looks like. She was very comprehensive already. But for example, with capacity building that GYBN does in support of and with the support of the CBD Secretariat and other donor governments, that we were able to conduct capacity building workshops throughout the world in different regions. And that has resulted in us being able to collect youth voices from at least 27 either national or regional, either through national or regional workshops, to get all these inputs from young people about what they want to see for the future of living in harmony with nature, and conducted over more than 3 years since 2017. We were also able to make really accessible, just like what Paloma was saying, that we need information, access to information in a way that young people can understand. If you've ever read a CBD or COP, UNFCCC document, it's confusing. It's in English or in your language, but it may not make sense. So we've created infographics and a really user-friendly guidebook about these processes and how does it work? How does young people actually engage in the process? What does it look like in reality? And make this accessible to all young people, and also to all the parties, the governments at these conventions. So this is one of the values that we bring to the process in implementing and making information accessible to people. Then with advocacy, just one example of how young people bring in a creative way to these really otherwise formal and stressful COP meetings. GYBN was able to do a campaign using little badges and buttons that says, I speak for, and it could be an ecosystem, it could be little creatures like diatoms. If you are geeky about it, you know what they are. Or it could be, I speak up for indigenous communities or community-based conservation, things like that. And we made it into a campaign where anybody at the COP would then adopt a badge and then tell us in 30 seconds what they're here for. Like they're here to stand for this creature, this ecosystem, this thing that they're supporting. So it's one way to ground everybody at the meeting about what they're negotiating for. And our presence there also reminds them that this is for the future generation, even if our voices are also in the mix of hundreds of voices as well, because youth is one constituency at these meetings. So these are just concrete ways to bring that. And then reflecting on the word cloud, respect is definitely required. There are too many words there. And I think if we go into each and every one of them, we can find lessons. So I do encourage everybody to look at the word cloud and then think about what it means to you for each and every word there that you see.
Thank you so much, Mika. And I love, just that campaign with the buttons also to bring other voices in, right? As we start to get more and more space in some of these platforms, to make sure that we're keeping that door wide open, right? And representing and amplifying voices as best as we can, including for our non-human animal friends and plant life, right? Who cannot speak to us in the ways that we are used to hearing. So thank you for translating in those ways as well. I want to now shift over to Sungat to talk a little bit about what the IUCN is planning to do, and also maybe just from everything that has been shared in the panel and with the word cloud, how you might react or respond and some new ideas that you might have.
Great, thank you, Becca. And I mean, just to start, I think we are all doing one thing that was biggest in the word cloud, which is listening. And I think that's, all of us are kind of practicing and doing that now, but I think it's also a great example of this summit as a point of process. As you mentioned, Becca, in the beginning, this summit, we already have over 14,000 registered participants, among them 90% under the age of 35. And I think that already shows the huge demand and energy we have from the young people all around the globe on nature and biodiversity. So first thing I think from IUCN as a union, as a membership organization, is really harnessing that great energy together and taking that forward. Second, maybe one thing I might want to add there is follow through. So I think these convenings are great. It's a great process and the starting point for many other discussions. We already saw the high demand. And I think IUCN is also committed to following through the discussions that took place in this summit. I think one of the things that we all want to do is to take the outcomes, take the summary here, all the great learnings and listening that we have done throughout the panels, throughout the different workshops, and take it to the World Conservation Congress that's happening later this year. Also looking forward to most of your participation as well. And this would lead to going into the IUCN strategies, but also the members and partners strategies as well. And I think the third point I want to make is integrating. So I think once we have these discussions, dialogues, learnings, and outcomes that are coming up from the summit, I think we would also like to integrate that throughout our program. So IUCN has a 4-year program that was adopted by our members earlier this year. And already we are prioritizing youth in a new focus on people and nature. So integrating in the different level of programs, I think, is quite important. This means also improving our outreach to youth, building intergenerational partnership, but also working across education, engagement, and more activation and mobilization of youth-led communities. IUCN, as a union, we have more than 1,400 member organizations across the globe, and also 18,000 experts in our commissions. For currently now, I believe it's about 14% of young people in that commissions. And one thing that I can definitely share here is you can engage in the union actually from today, apply to become a commission member, participate in the activities, and look forward to the Congress, and also get involved in the different IUCN member activities in your communities and forge partnerships. So I think that's definitely one thing we would like to do, integrating the youth participation in our programs. And probably the last one I want to mention is always reviewing and looking at where we are and thinking where we are hitting the milestones. IUCN just conducted an external youth review. And we are now looking at the recommendations, the findings, and actually many of my colleagues now are also using this summit as a sounding board to see what are some of the recommendations that would really fill the gap that is currently out there in youth engagement. What are some of the strategies that IUCN is well positioned to take it forward and further engaging in youth. And with this, my suggestion, and looking at the word cloud as well, is to really give us your feedback, give us any creative process, because we don't always have to follow the process that was already there, that was built 10, 20 years ago. So give us creative ideas, give us the way that IUCN can take it forward based on this youth review, the strategy that would really add value in the current landscape. So that's probably my last word that I want to add, but also my ask to the young people in this summit as well.
Thank you so much. And one way we can all start to do that is through the Youth Speak Labs process of this summit, which is the outcomes process. And a team of Youth Speak reps will be listening to dialogues on all kinds of topics around biodiversity and environmental governance and conversation in that space, listening to you, channeling those into some policy briefs, which we will be taking to the World Conservation Congress and other spaces. So do please come along to those and add your thoughts, not just in the word cloud and the Zoom cloud here, but also on the Youth Speak website, which will stay live past the summit. So it doesn't end with this conversation or with next Friday and the formal end of the summit, but we will keep conversations going. I want to now kind of just quickly do a round robin of maybe some ideas that we heard and want to action in some way in our initiatives, wherever, home is. So Lefteris, quickly, an idea or something that has inspired you that you are going to kind of transfer back.
Well, thank you, Becca. To be honest, this is the first event ever that I was asked to discuss about tokenism. And that really surprised me. It's really surprising that in Greece, nobody's discussing about that, or even in Europe, to be honest. So the first thing that I'm going to do differently is I'm going to talk more about that. To be honest, I was thinking even, organizing an event in Greece to be able to have, the same theme as here, to mobilize the people there to speak up. I believe that's such an important topic, and it's such a pity that it's not discussed because, to be honest, in most of the times, people must be afraid to speak up. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that I would like to do after today's event is that I'm much more empowered and motivated now after hearing all these inspiring stories and similar backgrounds to search for international partnerships and collaborations. I think if we connect, young people all over the world and show to them that they are not alone, but they're a part of a vast network, I think we have amazing results. This is what many young people say to me, like, what can I change? I'm just a person. But if you realize that you're part of a membership of a network with millions of people, then you don't feel alone anymore and you can do much more stuff. So
Amazing.
This is what I get from today's event.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lefteris. Kailea?
I was really appreciating that reflection, Lefteris, around tokenism. And this is something that I have thought a lot on, but also interestingly, the first time that I've been invited to speak directly on the topic of it, not just raise it, trying to advocate for myself or other community members. So that is also kind of something that's percolating with me right now. But I think there are some really great reflections around capacity growing. And one of the things I have been reflecting on recently in my own kind of like rounding of this corner of aging out of the youth movement is how many different times I have been invested in by either an individual, picking me up to mentor me, or some type of youth program that gave me that kind of structure or some type of container where I had the opportunity to meet other like-minded people or to test out ideas, and how that has been something that I've just been so grateful for, and something that I want to continue to gift as I go through my life. So it really made me think about a part of this, the word of accountability that I left out on is like me as a person right now. Like I feel very accountable to these youth members and just walking them through these governmental processes, helping them understand some of the nuance of the language, even doing things like getting them to just practice speaking so that they can feel more comfortable when we're actually on the dais and getting into it. So that's what I'm really taking away, is wanting to just grow capacity and make sure that these young people I'm working with feel really empowered and respected, and more than anything, that their voice truly does matter. So thank you to each of you for all of your reflections and stories. It was really a great way to start my day. It's 7:14 now a.m. on my side of the world, and I will pass it back to you, Becca.
Thanks so much, Kailea. And Joyce, over to you, something that has challenged or inspired you to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, so I was reflecting. Thanks. I mean, it's been quite a rich discussion, and I was quite inspired by a reminder from Paloma that I think sometimes we tend to take for granted about the inclusion of youth in both processes. I mean, she talked about the challenges of even participating in some of the COPs because of the cost. So I think I will go back being more deliberate on how to basically strengthen the inclusion story, because we may have youth leaders who don't have the voice because of tokenism. So I think definitely that is a reflection worth taking. I also reflected on our UNEP's Young Champions of the Earth awards, which are aimed to recognize the good efforts of colleagues like Lefteris, who is here, who has done good work. But one of the takeaway messages, we probably need to dig deeper, to go further down into the communities to see if there may be youth leaders there who have been affected by tokenism. So those are the two. And I was also thinking, is there a translation of tokenism? Because in our communication in different languages, we need to be able to, whether it's in Spanish, UN languages. So I'll take tokenism and reflect with my communication colleagues, how do we translate this into other languages? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. These kind of meta concepts that we start thinking about in very academic English, right? Which just adds yet another layer of inaccessibility to the conversation, and yet how important it is, as Lefteris and Kailea pointed out, that we have explicit conversations about this, right? And that it's not just something that only gets raised reactively in a moment when it happens by the person it's happening to. So yeah, thank you very much to all of you for that. I want to leave a good amount of time for some questions from the participant, from our audience. But before we do that, Paloma, maybe just a brief word that, if you were able to speak, and you are now, to some politicians, local, national, or global, about youth environmental advocacy and activism, something that they need to know or need to understand and don't quite get, what would it be? Kind of keep it tweet level, because that's all the attention span they have.
Okay, I think coming to the resolution to everything that we said, I think what world leaders need to understand is that we are definitely working together for the same objective, which is being alive and fighting for life. So, I mean, participating is not only a matter of choice, it is our right. And we are ready for it, and we have all the capacity need. We just need the support and the inclusion.
Great. And Mika?
Wow, that's a hard one, a tweet-worthy message. Well, then I want to say that we bring fresh perspectives and we question, but we are not able to solve everything on our own either. We're not a magic bullet for you to say that, yes, we've included the youth in this. What do you want for the world and the future? We have to do this together in an intergenerational, equitable collaboration.
Great. And Suna?
Thanks, Rebecca. Lots of reflection, but I also want to think about the timeliness of the discussion that we are having, and we are still in the middle of the pandemic. And one thing it struck me looking at the different statistics is that youth are among the hardest hit by the economic impact of this pandemic. I was just looking at the ILO status and ILO stats, and it says youth employment is estimated to have declined globally by 8.7%, which is more than double the adult that was 3.7%. And I think most policymakers currently, their focus is on economic recovery. And now most of the policymakers, I think, hopefully, or not, we would have to discuss more about this, but understand the importance of nature-based recovery and green recovery. But when we think about job creation on nature-based recovery, I think there are three things that we would really like the policymakers and ourselves to consider. One is, I think, based on this discussion, I realized that maybe not yet we are there, that we have to put youth in the design phase from the beginning to think about job creation policies, the nature-based recovery policies. As second, I think it's important, and some of you mentioned about capacity building, mentorship. I think it's important to look at the skills gap and really support the youth to kind of build that skills that is needed for green jobs or for nature-based recovery. And then I think third, it's important to think how to support youth entrepreneurs and a youth-led community to be part of the nature-based recovery, to make sure the recovery effort is for people and for nature. And I think youth is the biggest group that can make that happen and bring that energy forward. Thank you.
And Kailea, message to policymakers.
A message to policymakers. Ooh, I need a moment on that. Maybe come back to me.
Left Terrace, you're in the hot seat then.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what I would like to say to them is that youth involvement is not a nice to have activity. Rather, it is an essential activity in order to have a future. We are already experiencing the damages of the climate crisis that we have. And to speak in policymakers' language, the economic destruction that we are going to face because of the climate catastrophe is going to be huge. And I believe that young people, the younger generation, can provide solutions so to be able to deal with this climate crisis in a long-term sustainable way. I believe that the young generation can provide the solutions for that.
Thank you, Left Terrace. And I also want to just commend Kailea for passing the baton and saying, I need a little bit more time to answer this well, right? One really great live example of youth making sure they aren't tokenized and pressured into saying something quickly, like Mika pointed out at the very beginning. Kailea, have I talked for long enough?
Yeah, Sunga, when you were talking, I was taking notes and I was still in that, and just like all that you were bringing. So it took me a moment there. But, I think a message to policymakers is that, young people are really the ones who are going to be not just bearing witness, but actually living through. Their lives are going to be the most impacted. I consistently think about what it is that I'm raising my son into, and the style and level of parenting in the Anthropocene is very different than how I was parented, but just in the 90s. The reality of what it is that I will be facing, I will not be that old in 2050. So just to say, I'm going to be experiencing a lot, and my descendants are going to be experiencing more. So they certainly deserve a place at the table. They certainly deserve for their voices to be reckoned with, because they're truly the ones who are going to be living it.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just the importance of when we're doing that listening, right? And it takes time, and we live in a world that is very high speed, and we live in a world that kind of wants turnaround really quickly. And part of this, and part of avoiding tokenism, right, is that it takes more time and resources for those seats, that Kailea is talking about are so important. And so again, I want to thank all the panelists so much for demonstrating that genuine listening and going back and forth and building on each other. And I hope that we can see more of this in policy discussion spaces. I want to turn to some of the questions from our audience members and start perhaps with this from Megan, who shares that she's tried her best to be an active participant in conferences and the conservation community. turning on camera, being the first to ask questions and all of that kind of thing. And yet a huge part is still very imposter feeling, right? That like, don't quite belong here. I'm not quite enough of an expert. What kind of authority do I have to speak for youth or even for myself? How perhaps can we get some ideas from particularly the young panelists to move away from that self-doubt and imposter syndrome? And then from some of our more experienced panelists, maybe some reassurance that it doesn't actually ever quite go away, but some ways that you've learned to deal with it. So Mika, can we maybe start with you? Oh, we just lost Mika. Okay, Lefteris?
Yes, of course. First of all, I think that's a thought that most of us were having. I think myself included. So the way that I am able to continue working is that I learned to accept who I am, and I learned to accept that I can perform at my 100%, and that should be enough for myself. I cannot do 200% of me. It's just this who I am, and in this way, if I think that I'm trying my best to achieve what I want, then I'm in peace with myself. But I'm never, I never stop to be afraid. I keep on being afraid every time I take a risky decision or I do a risky endeavor. I think my secret is to be able to keep on working, keep on doing what I'm doing, despite my fear. So this I would like to.
Thanks, Lefteris. Paloma?
Hey, hello everyone. I will just say, like, sister, you represent yourself at least, and everyone has something to add in the conversation. Remember that we are not like leaders of the future that will inherit the world. We are leaders of the present, and we lead the conversations. We lead the way that we want the world to walk. So just go ahead and speak up, speak with the youth that work with you, and make sure that you are passing the message that you want to share. Just that, and be confident. I'm looking for you in the crowd.
Thank you, Paloma. And I also want to just share with everyone, the panelists have just received a private message saying, Paloma, you're the best listener I have seen in a while. Absolutely, right? The cheerleading from Paloma is fantastic. Jyoti, can we maybe hear from you, kind of tokenism as you kind of go through and come into more and more authority and that feeling of imposter syndrome at the same time. How do you, kind of deal with that?
So I will give you a little bit of an idea of my age. I'm well into my 50s, and I can honestly tell you, I still am nervous and not sure of what I'm saying when I am in meetings and new panels and in places where I'm supposed to speak. I also feel, what authority do I have to speak? Just because I'm in this position doesn't mean I know everything. So I think self-doubt is something that will see you through life. I don't think it's going to go away ever. And if it does go away, then it means you're doing something wrong, in my opinion, because you have to constantly keep, questioning yourself and questioning your own power and authority. Because if you don't, then you I think lose some of the empathy and really your own worth, I think. So to keep that self-worth, you have to keep doubting yourself and always trying to improve yourself and learning. That's my experience. So if you're feeling self-doubt in your 20s and 30s, I'm still feeling it in my 50s. I'm always nervous before I come on panels like this, including this one. But I also have to say one other point that I wanted to make before. It is also about learning. Tokenism, when you talk about, is not just, youth, it's just not about capacity building for the youth. It is also capacity building from the youth to us. And I will give you a very good example of that. CBD in a nutshell that has been produced by Gibbon. And it is something that we are hoping we will have a third edition. That's what Chantal tells me. So I shout out to Chantal and her respect to all of you. When I joined the CBD, I had been working on, issues of Convention on Biological Diversity, but I mostly have been working on climate change in the red area. I read CBD in a nutshell because some of the issues are so complicated here. It's my go-to book. It's on my shelf while in the office. I've been in the office in 1 year, but it is on the shelf in my office. And every time I find that I don't really understand a particular reason or particular definition, I do go to CBD in a nutshell and look it up. So it's a very, very important book for us, and it's produced by the youth. So it is not only capacity from us, but it is capacity from the youth to us. I also want to raise one very important issue on empowerment, because I think youth have to find ways to empower themselves, because we should be talking about inclusion, support, and giving space, and not about empowerment of youth. Because if we say we're empowering youth and adults are empowering youth, adults are still in a space of power. And so we're just simply agreeing to give power to the youth. So we have to turn this on its head and call it inclusion and support and giving space. And really, capacity is built both ways. Thanks a lot. I took up more time than I should have.
Thanks, Jyoti. But I answered several questions at once. And I think absolutely the point that, in terms of imposter syndrome, or we're not sure of kind of our own expertise, that is, universal. And also the more we share, the more space we are creating for others to share and learn alongside us. So thank you for that. And maybe over to Mika to answer a question from Veronica about what are some of the processes that can help raise the voices of society and do this kind of collective unified voice that we've been talking about across different conventions, right? So not just within the CBD, right? But we know that biological diversity and climate change are totally connected in the ecosystem, and start to break down some of these silos. So how can Gibbon, kind of get out of the Gibbon box?
Yes, and I'm gonna have to ask you to ask Paloma too. So we often work together with the other youth constituencies across all the other what we call multilateral environmental agreements. And this is not just a youth thing too. Although young people are great at working across different silos and just texting each other whenever there's something up, but this is something that needs to happen not just with youth, but with all non-youth spaces. We need to connect, broadly speaking, environmental issues to other issues as well. And I hope my connection is all right. But I will just continue saying, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you fine. You're frozen, but we can hear you. So keep chatting.
Oh, am I back? Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure where I got disconnected, but I was saying that we need to bring not just biodiversity to climate and work together, but also all environmental issues and bring it to other spaces as well. It's a human rights issue. It is an issue about economic, growth, but I put growth in quotation marks because we need to think about what it means to be prosperous, to be wealthy, to be healthy. We need to talk about biodiversity and health. So all of these things we are trying, but the world did not come to this stage in a day, in a century. It took millennia for the world to get to where it is now. And as a young person, I can be very impatient and I want things now because we feel the urgency of what's going on. But I have mentors who guide me and tell me that, okay, we need to also put this into context and then figure out where can young people be most effective to push things beyond that tipping point. Hopefully not the tipping point for the planet, but the tipping point for action. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mika. Very good, like points that you raised. Like I feel the same. I mean, all matters are connected. We are in the same world in the end. I mean, we are not in different worlds, so everything is connected. But honestly, like when we think about how we need to connect, and in the name of the Youth Advisory Group, please feel welcome. We are in this together with Jimin. But what I was going to say is that we also need your help as decision makers in the UN agencies. For example, us that work together with UN agencies. Lots of time, like people from different agencies reach us and they are talking of the same thing, but they don't say they talked with us. And at some point we just discover, oh, you talked with that about this. And we are like doing the same thing, but separately. So please help us out in these two, because we are the biggest generation. Of course, it's hard to gather everyone together. But when we try, we also need that help for us to have like the communication flowing, because we have our own system of decision making on how we want to engage, on how we want to put our demands. And of course, we know that when we get all these demands together, they are much more stronger than me as the youth advisory group and the other six saying, without Mika, without Lefteris. So of course we are much more strong. So help us in that. Don't separate us. Please, you help us unite. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another word for the word cloud is just anti-silo, right? And break down all of these kind of divisions and barriers between. We have a really important and somber question from Rain, which is about what kind of inspirational message or advice might we give to youth activists, including those who are fighting for human rights, who are being verbally or physically assaulted or even killed, as we think about the plight of environmental defenders around the world. And I'd like to start by just highlighting that the Escazú Agreement comes into force on April 22nd on Earth Day, the first legally binding international treaty that requires countries to investigate and prosecute crimes against environmental defenders. A really wonderful example of legal leadership from Latin America and the Caribbean. And so just kudos to all of the activists there who worked to make that agreement happen and build environmental defenders really explicitly into legal policy frameworks. Really, really amazing. So I want to kind of let panelists decide if they have some thoughts on this in terms of how to bolster and support our friends around the world who are doing this action in the midst of really real threat.
Well, I can say something on this, honestly. But I feel like the most important thing, like when we come from regions just like mine, where it's not okay to, when I was saying that I cannot say anything that I want, it's because we all know, we all see the news, we all see how it's not that fine things and activism here. So I mean, when I feel more safe to speak up, to bring what is happening, is when I have like the support and the real support of people that are listening and that come from different parts and that can actually add. Because but this is also like some sort of problem, because I am someone that has some kind of visibility for the chair that I occupy. But I mean, when you go to my friends that are really in the front line and don't have this visibility, I mean, is there any place that we can sort of have like a network that can support these young girls, these young people and young activists that might be facing this problem? And I mean, it's a very complicated situation, but I feel like when we have like local struggles, if we have like global vision and global engagement on seeing these local struggles, of course, we are much more capable to overcome this than if we don't have the attention. So I feel it goes for this way.
Thanks so much, Paloma. Sunga, could we maybe get some thoughts from you on this from IUCN's perspective on environmental defenders?
Thank you. This is a difficult one because asking for inspiration, and I'm quite new to IUCN, but I can definitely share a bit of my personal reflection. And also, I want to quote the recent survey that I saw. So the recent survey conducted by one of the organizations, it says among the different groups, youth was the highest respondent that said that they would accept lower salary or lower condition to work for environmentally responsible companies. It also, youth was the group that say neither geography nor religion nor ethnicity serve as a source of identity, but more they saw the feeling of shared concern and shared desire is where they put the identity together. And I really think this is a message of hope for everyone. We are in this generation moving away from the conventional label and looking at our purpose as one of our roots for identity. And that's how we come together as a youth group. And I also think you have a means to do it. The technology is so advanced these days that it's much easier than a long time ago to come together and root your identity together on the purpose. So I don't know whether that serves as an inspiration, but I definitely see a hope and an opportunity with a respondent that I see in the survey. So just a thought that I wanted to share here.
Thanks so much for that. I've also just chatted into the group a link to a video made by UNEP highlighting the Azkazu agreement. So I thought I'd quickly get some thoughts from Joyce on this.
Yeah, so I was actually looking for the same video, so thank you. But I think 2 points. One is, if you look at UNEP, we have been consistent when there is evidence or when things are reported to us. My executive director, our executive directors, actually including the past, have issued very strong statement. 2, being part of the UN system, we have also, I think it was 2 years ago, signed an MOU with human rights, because the interface between human rights and environmental defenders is quite there. So sometimes we leverage, depending on the data and the evidence, our human rights commissioner when it comes to speaking up. Our Secretary General also has been very vocal, giving out statements. So I think it's a very difficult and painful issue, but also by speaking up, so the victims are not feeling that they're alone, that there is at least a system or people advocating for them is key. But I will not deny that it's an easy thing to do. But we have been consistent on our engagement in this, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thanks so very much to all of you. And our last question to wrap up is from Dominic. How, and it's a big question, how can we reform high-level governance and decision-making processes to be based on all of these truly inclusive and co-creative dialogue principles that we've just shared and demonstrated so well, rather than focusing on formal protocols, right, that just kind of by their nature force tokenism because of the formulas that are happening, to really focus on compassion, connection, care, and shared aspirations. And maybe Kailea, over to you for this one.
This question was just brought up last night in our meeting by one of our participants, and so I really appreciate it. And it's something that our commission, from the very beginning, we have been addressing, because the topic of climate change touches every aspect of our lives, and there needs to be opportunity for how it is that we engage people, where people feel invited, they feel like the space is actually accessible for them, whether it's a language barrier or you know, even having children, you know, as you can see, like working from home is a big deal for parents, or going to a meeting, needing childcare. So we have really advocated for this in our own commission, but one of the things that has actually really supported us in continuing to raise this issue is hearing that this is a need from people and hearing about it every single meeting. It strengthens our case when it is that we're trying to, you know, continue to ask the people who are the hosts or the moderators around how to do this. And so last night, after a year and a half of this question being posed, I felt like we, you know, and this is, I will also just say, patience is a really, really good practice when stepping into these types of spaces. Mika had brought up that it's like, that's a good reminder that that she has been supported in, that sometimes we have to slow down as well, and continue to be consistent in our asks and what it is that we're bringing forward. So a year and a half later, I really did feel last night that our city lawyer, who is one of the people who is a part of making sure that the processes that our meetings are conducted under are being implemented accurately, and also city staff and our city manager, I really saw them looking at each other and saying, okay, we will continue to look at this. We will continue to think about how it is we can shift aspects of these meeting structures. Of course, there are certain you know, procedures that have to go a certain way in order for votes to happen, or in order for things to be legal. But I just want to say again and again, like, keep asking, keep bringing the desire forward. People are listening, and you know, on my end, I go to staff all the time with the same asks. So those are some of my thoughts on this.
Yeah, and thank you for that reminder that the persistence is necessary, and change happens slowly in these big institutions, but it does change, right? And it does happen, and we've seen that. And so being sure that we're kind of consistent with the requests and doing that until it happens, absolutely. Sungha, again, would love to hear some IUCN thoughts on this and kind of what IUCN is doing to kind of try to break down some of the very big, bulky governance structures.
Well, yes, again, since I'm new, I don't know whether I can represent the whole IUCN, but I know one thing for sure, that in IUCN, we are also working hard to look at our governance structure as well. As you probably know, we are a global network, we are a union, and since we have a big membership base, we also have a very strong governance structure in place. And I think this is not only UN, IUCN, but many organizations that had grew this way. We all face the same challenge of thinking about how to make the governance structure work. On this question, I also have maybe 2 or 3 points, my personal reflection on this. One thing is, I think one thing we learned from the gender equality movement and mainstreaming gender is not only women who has to talk about that and gather. We need both men and women. And I think it's the same on what we're talking here in youth. And that's why I'm very glad that we are in this panel. That's the intergenerational panel. But I do think it's also the role of the adults to role model how we engage and empower youth. So when we are in these high-level discussions, I think it's also the responsibility of the adults to make sure that we kind of role model how we engage a youth. So that's one thing. Second thing that comes to me, and it was also a reflection when we talked about expertise, etc. I think it's important to remove jargons, and that's probably no. It's if I think about it, a long time ago when new professions came out, that was the way for people to protect their work and boundaries by creating a lot of jargon and historical. So that people who didn't learn all that was difficult to participate. But as Kalia mentioned, nature, biodiversity, and climate issue, it's not something that only experts should discuss. It impacts everyone, and therefore we should have really general language for everyone to understand, to everyone to participate, both youth and other groups. And for that, I think that's quite important. And then maybe the third one is I have already mentioned before in my discussion, send us creative processes. We are open to learn from the youth experience as well. And now we have different tools, we have different technology that we can use to engage and have this discussion forward. So any creative ideas, we would love to learn from this audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mika, I know you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I want to also share a little bit about the perspective from my region in Southeast Asia, because one thing that, to respond to Dominique's question about how to, reform these kinds of formulaic, formal processes. Well, one thing is to also understand how or why these processes have come about. And often in my region of the world, it's about showing respect to those in power, those in the higher rungs of the hierarchy. And that's rooted in a little bit of culture as well. Many of the young people in my region are not asked about their opinions. They're not they're not taught to question. So, and that's kind of how they've lived their lives. And as they grow up, it's new to them that young people are questioning them. It might be a sign of disrespect in some cases. And so being able to understand these processes and then trying to get to the same objectives, but doing things differently takes time. So the first step is also understanding from the other perspective why, and then moving from there. So patience, always.
Thank you so much for that, Mika. We are nearly at time, so I'm going to start wrapping up, but I want to make sure that we very briefly just hear the voice of all 7 of these fantastic panelists one more time. I'm going to ask them to share one word that kind of summarizes how they're currently feeling as a result of this dialogue. It's a completely unfair thing, I know, but one word. And one word only, I will mute you back. So if we could start maybe with GOT, with your one word.
Since I wasn't given time to think, I'll say happy.
Happy, thank you. Lefteris.
Optimistic.
Thank you. Happy, optimistic. Paloma.
Reforested.
Thank you. Happy, optimistic, reforested. Kailea.
Affirmation.
Thank you. Happy, optimistic, reforested, affirmation. Joyce.
Hopeful.
Thank you. Happy, optimistic, reforested, rejuvenated, hopeful. That wasn't your word, Kailea. What was your word? Affirmation. There we go. I can't play my own memory game. Mika.
Follow up with a hyphen.
It's one word. Okay. Very good. And Singa.
Energized.
Fantastic. Absolutely. So, and we need energized follow-up. Really great last 2 words to go with. We do need energized follow-up to this discussion. We have learned so much from these 7. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your time and engagement, those of you who are part of this live. To those of you watching the recording, if you do have questions, please do make your voice heard. We have a space for that on the Youth Speak website, which we'll link to. This is where the Global Youth Summit are kind of doing their outcomes process to feed into it. There are community boards. There's an open forum there to share resources, links, and all kinds of things. And we really, really do want you, your priorities, and what you know about conservation to be heard, because you have something to teach us all. So do please continue to participate in the Global Youth Summit. Please continue to contribute in the follow-up afterwards. Start to continue, make all of those networks that are happening on Whova, figure out how we can do the wonderful breaking down of silos between generations, between multilateral agreements, between regions that we've started to talk about in this dialogue. So let's please move the needle on conservation away from tokenism into genuine participation for youth and all other marginalized communities around the world. Thank you, stay engaged, and we're going to go ahead and close the discussion here. Be well, everyone.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Paloma,
everyone.
you need to, where? Thank you, everyone.